All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening and welcome to today's webinar, Data Protection Delivered as a Service, featuring Veeam and US Signal. I'm your moderator, Katie McCormick, Director of Marketing at US Signal. Before we begin, I would like to just take care of a few housekeeping items. If time allows, we'll host a Q&A session after the presentation. So please submit your questions during the webinar and we'll answer as many as possible following the discussion. If we're unable to get to your questions because we are limited on time today, please either email marketing@ussignal.com or reach out to your US Signal representative and we'll be happy to answer those questions. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared for future viewing. Following today's 30-minute webinar, you'll have the chance to attend a 1.5-hour virtual cooking class where you'll cook alongside Chef Milo to make a delicious fall meal and cocktail. This will begin at 6 p.m. Following the webinar. Today's webinar will include 4 key components: challenges and market trends, BaaS and DRaaS overview, Veeam-powered backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service, and how US Signal can help. And now I'd like to welcome today's presenters, Pat Cannon, Field CTO at US Signal, and Rick Vanover, Senior Director, Product Strategy at Veeam. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rick to get us started.
Well, cheers, Katie, and welcome everyone to a really compelling session. So we're going to jump right into our topic. When Katie highlighted the agenda today, I think when we look on the next slide, we'll see a couple of data points that'll really get the conversation started. There's a lot of things going on in technology today, and really ask yourself, does one or more of these things sound familiar? There's a lot of challenges to achieve what we want to do as practicing technologists and IT leaders in the segment. I think we all can align to some of these challenges. One that comes up the most in my experience is on the second column, second from the top. I don't have enough time to focus on strategic projects to transform the business. We all want to have this intentionality in everything we do, and we have this big set of expectations, but sometimes time is the biggest resource. Maybe you can relate to some of these other ones. Let's take a look at the next slide, and I want to highlight something that really helps drive this home. When you think about the time it takes to do things, the reality is we have market data here at Veeam. We're one of the leaders in the market in general. Even in some cases, we have more data than the industry analysts on what really goes on with customers. I want to draw your attention to one trend on the top right. 80% of organizations have an availability gap. And I've been at Veeam 12 years, and I have been talking about this for a very long time. And we've grown and been doing a lot of positive things in the market, but this is still an area that Veeam can help fix. An availability gap is, simply speaking, a disconnect between what your business expects and what the technology is implemented. Now, the good news is there's the technology can do basically whatever the business needs. But there is that gap, that people gap, that implementation gap, that service gap. And I think if you couple on the bottom underneath, ransomware, cloud things, COVID broke everything, it feels like. And then there's just so many challenges that get into the mix. So how do we really sort through that? So if we look at the next slide, you'll see a couple of key other areas that really drive home the topic of today. Backup as a service, BaaS, and disaster recovery as a service, DRaaS. And these are catch-all terms. We'll define those here in a second. But I consistently see in my practice, I talk to customers, I talk to partners every day about their needs in the market. This comes up almost all the time. And we have found that a lot of organizations go down this as a service model for a number of different reasons. I want to draw your attention to the middle data point. 55% of backup as a service adopters do so for data security. I remember before I joined Veeam, I worked at a bank. And the one thing I liked to do the least was handling the audits and things like that, right? So I think if any of you are in any type of GRC environment, you would understand what I mean by, wouldn't it be great if one of these biggest burdens are taken off my plate? And there's flexibility that goes through this all, through the mode, whether it be economics. And I really like on the bottom right, data survivability. Now, That's actually something that Pat and I are going to talk about here in a moment. But the reality is, if there's one thing as a backup expert, which I guess I'll call myself that, if there's one thing I think organizations need to take away, is to have an indisputable copy of your data. So that survivability, that's going to come back and help you. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Let's take a look at the next slide. And here, as we look a little bit more specifically, what does backup as a service mean to you or to an organization? Now, this comes from some research that we've done in the market, but the reality is these as a service models are very versatile. I like to think that Veeam in the market, what we're doing here, and through our partners, in fact, I'll go one step farther and say partners are in Veeam's DNA. But basically, what does backup as a service mean? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I'm not in sales and I'm not good at math, but I can tell you these numbers add up to more than 100%, especially when you select all aspects. But the reality is there's characteristics such as the backup runs on the cloud without any on-site hardware, or it's deployed and managed as a service. What I think is actually really important as a takeaway is that backup as a service, BaaS, and disaster recovery as a service, DRaaS, take an element of the cloud and apply it to a different model. And I'll go one step further and say that the cloud is a model. It's not a location. You know, the cloud doesn't always have to start with the letter A. Backup as a service is one of those examples. Any one of you on this call can go to a model of elasticity or these characteristics of backup server software runs on the cloud, and the infrastructure is deployed and managed remotely. Those are the aspects of some of the cloud services that are available today. And depending on where you sit in the world, if you're an enterprise, if you're a mid-sized business, you have different needs, and you can have different characteristics as well. And so it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And the same applies to DRaaS. Let's take a look at the next slide. So DRaaS, or disaster recovery as a service, same thing. I'm not very good at math, but I can tell you it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and sometimes even multiple things at once. What I want to drive your attention to on this, which I think is surprising if you look at all reasons, look at the very last one. You never want to highlight the last thing on a survey, but mandates from executive leadership. Remember that gap that I spoke about, that disconnect between what's implemented and the reality of the capabilities? Executives, business continuity experts, senior leadership expect that we are in a world of delivering business continuity when bad things happen. I like to say I have nothing but evidence of bad things happening to good data in the form of case studies over at Veeam.com. And the reality is, if we take a look at disaster recovery, it's one of those things that I see so many organizations never doing it right. But I'll go one step further. When I talk to organizations who have really had a high five, I beat ransomware and I recovered very well. You know what actually comes up almost or more often than you would think is their disaster recovery strategy. Because you could also go one step further and say that ransomware is a disaster. So if you think about the threats on the data, and then even on the very first response, cost efficiency and resource sharing, the CapEx investment to get a proper second site is generally untenable, which is why people don't do it. So my thought here, and the advice to the market here, is that disaster recovery as a service is the way to bridge that gap. So let's take a look at the next slide. So there's some different characteristics, right? And I talked to a lot of organizations, and Pat will elaborate on this here in a second. Some organizations consume backup as a service. Some will consume disaster recovery as a service. But, when you think about the different characteristics that go into this, some organizations may need both. I like to say everything needs a backup, but not everything needs full-blown DR. And I'll go one step further. When I debrief with organizations who have been through critical incidents, one consistent thing is no matter what type of plan or strategy they've had, it always kind of breaks into this rule of thirds. there's 1/3 of their infrastructure, or at least one logical connection of their infrastructure, that if you look over on the DRaaS characteristics, critical systems and data sets, that's what they need to do what they do. I would also put above that as a little bit of an asterisk, a communications platform. Nowadays with M365 and G Suite, collaboration's a little bit less reliant on on-premises technologies, but I'd highlight communication is important. Then there's this middle zone, which is eventually, backup and recovery will take care of it. I don't need full-blown DR. And then there's this last third, which is we don't actually need DR for that. That's just summarized, but these characteristics are really important. And it also depends on just having an awareness and assessment of your infrastructure. So let's take a look at the next slide. If I look at what is my view on this, so, Veeam and US Signal are partners in the market. I have a special affection for US Signal for where they're based, long story, different time. But Veeam is in the market to be the most trusted provider of backup, recovery, and data management solutions that deliver modern data protection. So, I ask myself all the time, what does modern data protection mean? I've been at Veeam 12 years, and somewhere on the wall back here, there's the modern data protection that we had from 2012. I should probably put it a little bit more front and center. But that's kind of a common theme here at Veeam. We want to continually innovate the market. We need to do that through partners. Veeam's very focused on being a software-only solution. And we're also very focused on being backup, recovery, and data management. There's a crossroads of data that we're at here at Veeam. And if we go on the next slide, what we can see also is that in the market, when I started at Veeam in 2010, I used to actually spend the first couple moments telling everybody how to spell Veeam. But at this time, we're shared for #1 market share on the latest IDC numbers, and we're just making incredible strides in the market. Everything from the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the Forrester Wave, the Forrester reports. Actually, some of these numbers are old. Not that it's just hard to keep up. We're closing in on that 500,000 customer mark, which is just unfathomable. So that being said, I see a lot of data. Veeam, I would argue, is this interesting crossroads of data. And then if we go on the next slide, we kind of look at, well, where are we today? We're in this very broad platform today. When I joined Veeam in 2010, the backup story and the replication story was limited to just VMware workloads. And actually that same year is when we launched our Veeam Cloud Service Provider program. And over time, we've seen more products. We've seen physical workloads, more hypervisors. 4 hypervisors are supported now. The public cloud has come into play. Microsoft 365 has come into play. Just last week, we released the Salesforce backup product. So there's yet another software as a service offering in market. And I think it's important when you think about your backup as a service opportunity, your DRaaS opportunity, there's a lot more than just the data on this array. And, Veeam is going to be that trusted provider to help you get the outcomes you want. And we have critical partnerships with Pat and his colleagues at US Signal that'll help you get there. So let's go to the next slide real quick. And then I really want to hear kind of how these two things make all the difference in the world. I want to draw your attention to the Cloud Connect technology. This is an ultra resilient copy of data. This is going to be the thing that makes a difference in ransomware. And I'm talking too much, too many stories. So Katie, one more time to the next slide real quick. And these services hit all the boxes, right? It sounds great to go for help, but does it have end-to-end encryption? Does it integrate with cloud service provider platforms? Does it have multi-tenancy to keep your own data isolated? And that very last one on the bottom, the networking. That's the stuff that keeps Pat and I bald, all right? That's the hard stuff. Why not leave that to the experts? These are the benefits and the outcomes that can make the difference. So now I think if I remembered the slides right, we're going to just pivot right here. This is the part that matters. Why act now? You can lower your costs. You can get on the bottom what I like best, 25% shorter backup windows and 3 times more backups per day. Think about that gap. Those 2 points right there make the difference. And then as well, 95% of customers are able to get out of that ransomware problem. That's where you want to be. So that's my point of view. So now I think I'm going to turn it over to Pat to kind of put us in the blocking and tackling mode.
Yeah, appreciate that, Rick. So I think we've covered a lot of good ground thus far, just on defining Veeam's role in the space as far as backup as a service, DR as a service. The way that we deliver on that strategic partnership is to essentially be that offsite for you, right? So Rick talked about the importance of that in lowering cost. And then I'm also going to share with you a use case at the end in how that's really important when we think about ransomware recovery. You have to have that outside infrastructure to recover onto. So the way that we help our customers through the Veeam Cloud Connect program and the Veeam Availability Suite is in 3 different product models. So the first here is Cloud Backup for Veeam. I'm not going to read every one of these points for you, but I think there's a couple things that are important to point out. One being the unmetered ingress and egress for storing and recovering your backup files. It's something that has always been available to US Signal customers. We provide the bandwidth for you. We don't ding you for the amount of data that you send back and forth across our gateways. And then insider protection. So insider protection is critical when we think about protecting from things like ransomware. Purists would argue with me if I was to describe it as an air gap, so I will not do that. But it is the way that modern backup platforms achieve that segregation between data that could be accessed and manipulated by some type of threat actor, and then the ability to protect and insulate from that. So, US Signal's backup, cloud backup for Veeam offering, strictly a usage-based charge, nothing else for you to buy, right? So if you've got Veeam as your backup, you got the ability to send those off to US Signal. Next slide kind of gives you a little bit of a high-level architecture of really honestly any Veeam Cloud Connect partner. But the important things there, just noticing that we've got this multi-tenancy built in on our side already, right? So your backups land in our storage through that encrypted gateway. You've got compute, memory, and storage on the back end to be able to leverage in the event that you need it. Slide, Kitty. Cloud replication for Veeam. So this falls into the disaster recovery as a service model, right? So you're actively taking backup snapshots and shipping them off to US Signal's VMware Cloud. Our managed services team is going to co-author a disaster playbook with you. We're going to test that twice a year, and we're going to check in with you monthly, right? IT environments are dynamic. These services need to be curated long-term to reflect any changes in your environment so that we get the desired outcomes that, we would expect in an actual disaster situation. So a little bit different billing structure. There is a per VM usage charge. You don't pay for any of the compute and memory unless you actually need it during failover. And that's really the cost savings that we're talking about, in the front half of the presentation here, just around how customers can, get the full benefit of that as a service model by not having to provide their own computing and storage infrastructure. Let's go ahead and move on here. Very similar from an architecture, right? What I would point out that's different is that, you're actually doing a replica of your virtual machines from your production storage all the way encrypted through that cloud gateway and into the US Signal VMware Cloud. And then last but not least, what we call Cloud Archive for Veeam is essentially the capacity tier, right, for your Veeam backup. So as you age out your retention, then you want to put that long-term storage on less expensive object storage. We provide you the ability to do so. Again, no ingress or egress, supports object lock, right? So insulates you even further from the ability of accidental or intentional manipulation of that data out.
Maybe Pat had a battery die on a wireless headset. I don't know. I think he'll be back here for the attendees. He's going to jump right back here real quick because I got a question on this one for him. This is cool stuff. One thing, while Pat's working on his audio, I'll add a comment here. This is actually very compelling for a lot of organizations who maybe have an anti-AWS policy. Maybe just you're in retail. Doesn't make sense to support Amazon for something like that. This is a great way to get that offsite backup. I talk to a lot of organizations who are in that situation. This particular offering is a great kind of market differentiator for the organizations maybe in retail or actually transportation or groceries or all the different things that start with A. And when you think about the locking that Pat mentioned, that's currently not available with Azure, but it's planned for V12. But this is a great offering in the meantime, for sure.
Hey, Rick, while we wait, we do have a question submitted.
Okay.
Maybe this is something that you can assist with. James is asking if the cloud replication solution to be used with a customer on-prem Hyper-V as well as VMware hypervisors. What is a typical RTO, RPO for Veeam replication?
You guys hear me?
Yeah, you're back,
there we go.
Pat. You're back.
All right. So I caught the question.
Perfect.
So in US Signal's offering, Veeam does have partners that would support a Hyper-V source environment. US Signal would only support a VMware source environment. So typically what we're going to do from a recovery time standpoint is at the completion of building the disaster recovery playbook, we will actually do a test in conjunction with you. And the results of that testing allow us to obligate ourselves to a recovery time objective SLA. So it's customized for each customer. All environments are different, sizes of virtual machines are different. You have the ability to select recovery point objectives, I believe as low as 4 hours. And, typical RTO, for say a virtual machine that is an average size of, 200 gigabyte disks, you're probably looking somewhere in the neighborhood of, under 30 minutes to power the machine on, get it connected to the network. So those are customized for each environment. Apologize for losing the audio. My call just dropped, so I was not able to get back in. But if you want to go ahead and move on, we'll get you wrapped up here. Just some stats here as far as how US Signal is doing. We're protecting just over 4,000 endpoints today, and that is landing on 4.2, just about 4.2 petabytes of storage. And then last but not least, I want to run through a quick use case. We had a customer, they're a cloud backup for Veeam customer. They had elected insider protection. They were unfortunate to experience host and OS level ransomware attack. So all of their local backups and the top level cloud repository backup data was deleted. And the result of that was that obviously they had encrypted production data and no ability to recover because they had lost access to all their backups. Fortunately, though, insider protection backup data in US Signal's cloud was safe. So that's that segregation, that logical segregation that we talked about. It was deleted at the data plane, but within the control plane, our engineers have the ability to get in and use that data. We work to direct hand in hand with the customer's incident response and forensic teams. And what I was referring to earlier, in this situation, whenever you perform forensics on that data, you don't have the ability to manipulate any of that. So it has to stay in an untouched state. So they had no ability to recover to their own environment. So we worked hand in hand. Initially, what we did was we reached out to our technical assets on the Veeam Cloud Service Provider team. Great group of folks hopped on the call with US Signal engineering teams. I believe it was around 11 p.m. at night, and gave us a lot of good information and confirmed what we thought to be the appropriate recovery lanes. We then assisted the customer's IR firm with recovering those virtual machine backups from the insider protection storage. As we were bringing backups online, our security operations center worked with the IR firm, to deploy our managed detection and response platform. And that was really successful in making sure that as we were bringing things online, we were preventing any redetonation of any malware or any additional east-west spread. So the result, customer was able to continue operating their business with the appropriate technology platforms and through our recovery efforts, while the ransomware forensics efforts continued on the infrastructure that had been compromised at their data center. And they're still running in the US Signal Cloud today. They made the choice to stay. Topic for another webinar, but there are some inherent additional, logical and administrative segregations that help customers in this exact same type of scenario. So with that, I think we came in right at 6 o'clock so that we didn't step on Chef Milo.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Pat. I wanted to ask, we have one question, if we could do a quick answer here. Are there any plans to add immutability to cloud backup for Veeam service?
Immutability is available for customers through the current versions of Veeam. So with those hardened Linux appliances. That immutability, we hope, will be able to be extended through to the cloud as well. For now, we would leverage the insider protection platform.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that, insider protection, for those who don't know about it, is an out-of-band copy of the backup data. It's actually better than immutability because it's a full separate copy. And by its name, insider protection, it's meant to protect against an individual or a collection of individuals that know where the data is and are with intent to do something bad, which is really the mindset you have to put yourself in the threat actor for. Is it offline and powered off? No. But it is what I call ultra resilient, because even if I'm the tenant and I know where the data is, I can't tamper with it. So that's been in market since 2016. It's a very refined and resilient, ultra resilient copy. And if I saw the Cloud Archive service as well, object lock capacity tier, that's already available from US Signal. So there's a lot of ways to do it. I would encourage everyone to just talk to your Veeam rep, talk to your US Signal rep, to really find the level of resiliency that matters. But Cloud Connect with Insider Protection is a really good way to start.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rick and Pat, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. That's all the time we have for today's webinar. We're going to turn it over to Chef Milo for the fun part now. So for the next hour and a half, we will be following his lead here to make a delicious fall dinner and cocktail. So thank you so much and have a great evening.